a surprising invitation to America. Earlier, we have seen how Gailhac always waited for God to manifest his will before important decisions were made for the RSHM. Very often, God's will was made known through chance meetings, sometimes with people previously unknown. The husband of a distant friend wanting to sell his house in Lisburn in the north of Ireland. The sister of one of the nuns inviting the RSHM to take over her school in Porto, Portugal. A chance meeting in Bootle, England, between Mother St. Thomas Hennessy and the pastor of a church she had never been in before. And now a chat on the deck of a small boat between two French RSHM sisters and an elderly American woman. This becomes an occasion of grace. God wanted the RSHM in America. The woman who contributed to the RSHM mission of the 19th century was Mrs. Sarah Worthington King Peter. She was born in 1800, just 2 years before Gailhac, in Ohio, a new state in the Midwestern part of the United States. I'd like to tell you a little bit about her background. Her family had originated in the South at a time when slavery was prevalent, but the Worthington family had freed their slaves and moved into the new free state of Ohio. Sarah's father, Thomas Worthington, was very engaged in politics, and he became the governor of that new state. As a result, Sarah grew up knowing all sorts of interesting and important American figures from that time. Henry Clay and his daughters, Daniel Webster, Dolly Madison, they all came to the Worthington house. And even Tecumseh, the most powerful chief of the Native American tribe of the area, had been a guest in the Worthington home. As was customary at the time, Sarah Worthington was married at the age of 16 to a young lawyer by the name of Edward King. They had many children, but only 2 sons survived to maturity, and only one of these sons outlived their mother. Meanwhile, Sarah, who was an Episcopalian woman filled with compassion and a sense of social justice, gave much of her energy to the sick and poor of her society. In many ways, she reminds me of Gailhac, who was active as a young priest in Béziers at that same time. They both ministered to the victims of the worldwide cholera epidemic in their respective countries. Around the time Gailhac was beginning the Refuge for Women, Sarah was sponsoring a house for Madeleines, as they were called at that time. And later she sought to encourage the creativity of women by opening a design center specifically to encourage and exhibit their household inventions. Her family motto was, "In winter we flourish." For Sarah, that motto became almost a secular expression of the dying and rising dynamic of the Paschal Mystery. For example, when her young husband died in 1836, she grieved, but then she embraced a new life again. Sarah moved from Ohio with her 2 sons to begin anew in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she enrolled the boys in Harvard University. And while they studied, she too studied. It was during this time that she mastered the French, Italian, and German languages, in addition to her native English. A few years later, she married again, this time to an older man, William Peter, the British consul living in Philadelphia. And when he died, and after the winter of her grief, she tried again to flourish. She traveled to Europe and to the Holy Land, and she began to feel a great desire to become a Roman Catholic. So after a time of instruction, she was baptized Catholic in Rome in 1855. The RSHM encountered Sarah Peter on the deck of a small boat sailing from Marseille to Civitavecchia, the port of Rome. This was in June of 1874. Gailhac and Mère Sainte Croix, the general superior, and Mère Saint Felix, her assistant, were traveling to Rome to offer their respects and thanks to Pope Pius IX for the decree or the decretum, officially recognizing the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary as a congregation directly under the jurisdiction of the papacy, not under the ultimate authority of any bishop, any diocesan bishop. This enabled the sisters to branch out throughout the entire world as a pontifical institute in the church. Now, during their journey, the two religious began conversing with Sarah Peter in French, a language that she had learned in the early days. Sarah showed great interest in what Mère Sainte Croix and Mère Saint Felix told her about Gaillac's charism and the mission of the RSHM. And a few days later, Sarah described the meeting in a letter to her son, Rufus. I remember finding that letter in a little library in Ohio and holding it in my hand. There's a very important sentence where she writes to Rufus, "There are very few passengers on the boat, except for two very intelligent and agreeable sisters on their way to Rome. They hope to see their congregation in America someday." During their conversation, Sarah Peter invited the RSHM to come to America. But the invitation was so immediate and so unpretentious that the sisters interpreted it at first as an expression of kindness made by an elderly woman and nothing more. They don't even mention it in their letters to the sisters in Béziers when they wrote home. They bade farewell to Sarah, but not before she could give the sisters and Gailhac some extra tickets to the first Northern American pilgrimage to see the Pope. So they took the tickets and they went. And everything changed for them when Gailhac, Mère Sainte Croix, and Mère Saint Felix arrived at St. Peter's for the pilgrimage. And they realized that this simple woman they had met on the boat was primarily responsible for organizing this first papal audience for North Americans. And everyone seemed to know her and to respect her. And when the Pope entered the audience hall, he went straight up to her, warmly greeting her by name, Madam Peter. He knew her well. From that moment on, Gailhac and the two sisters realized that God was calling them to America through the invitation of this woman whose calling within the Universal Church, they discovered later, was to settle European congregations of women in America where the immigrants from their countries needed them. From that time, the RSHM were eager to begin a community in America wherever Sarah Peter would place them. The religious never met Sarah Peter in person again, but they immediately corresponded with her once they had returned to the United States. Her invitation to establish a foundation in America was recognized as the catalyst that would change Gaillac's long-held desire for a foundation in America into a reality. By 1876, Sarah Peter, with Mother Sainte Croix's cooperation, had found the location, Sag Harbor, New York. We thought it would be Cincinnati, Ohio. But the bishop there said, Sarah, you've brought enough religious communities to Cincinnati. And so she decided to locate us where she used to vacation in the summer, the east end of Long Island. Sarah Peter had obtained permission from the bishop, had made arrangements with the pastor of the parish to receive the sisters, had asked some New York friends to meet the travelers at the port and see that they got to Sag Harbor safely, and had purchased the tickets for their transatlantic voyage. As the sisters were departing for America in February of 1877, Gailhac wrote to Sarah Peter, addressing her as our foundress in America, and asking her continued involvement in all our efforts there. My daughters will always remember you with gratitude, he wrote. But Sarah never received the letter because, unknown to the community, she had died suddenly in America just before the sisters' departure from Basile. Because of that simple conversation on the deck of a small boat, our mission was planted in America. First in Sag Harbor, New York, and then spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the east to the west in the United States. Without the intervention of this remarkable American laywoman, our mission in America may never have taken root. Sag Harbor had once been a prosperous whaling town, but by 1877, most of the inhabitants were employed in small mills and factories. The sisters were grateful to be on terra firma in America. There were 6 sisters, and sometimes they are remembered as the 3 A's, Augustine, Agatha, and Arsenia, and the 3 B's, Basil, Benedict, and Bartholomew. Almost immediately, 2 of the sisters reopened the St. Andrew's Parish School in the old church, now empty, and divided into 2 sections, one for the boys and one for the girls. Other sisters began to teach catechism to 30 young adults, the age of 18 to 23, and they quickly realized that those adults had not yet been prepared for Holy Communion. The convent was prepared to house the boarding school and a day school, but the enrollments progressed slowly but surely. From the very beginning, the sisters opened a night school, as in Lisbon, for the young women and girls who worked all day in the mills and the small factories. They were described as unutterably poor and unfamiliar with the formalities of life. So in addition to teaching the basic courses of reading, writing, and arithmetic and the catechism, the religious also tried to show them how to dress and how to adjust to society. Gailhac was very eager for the religious to extend themselves to Protestants, who were the majority in the town. In an advertisement for the school, it was made very clear pupils of all denominations are received in the school, but for the sake of good discipline, all are required to be present at the public religious exercises. This outreach to all was Gailhac's message to the sisters in those early months in Sag Harbor, while continuing to be open to the particular customs and needs in the locality. The RSHM in Sag Harbor were unshakably bound to their sisters in Europe through their common history, charism, mission, and deep affection for their founders and for one another. The Institute, united as one body for mission, was becoming truly international.